The story began with a silence. A void where a child's laughter should have been. In the small, tightly knit community of Oak Park, a single question, "Where is Gus Lamont?" tore a hole in the fabric of everyday life, unleashing a tide of fear, speculation, and a desperate, collective need for answers. What followed was a tale of two investigations. The first, a very public, Herculean effort to scour the earth. The second, a far more sinister and shadowy probe into the human heart. The first found nothing. The second would uncover a web of contradictions, digital ghosts, and a chilling shift in focus that would forever alter the case. For days, the narrative was one of monumental, human versus nature effort. The image of the search for Gus Lamont was etched into the public consciousness by sweeping aerial shots of a vast, green landscape. Volunteers by the hundreds, their faces masks of determined hope and creeping dread, formed human chains, their eyes scanning the ground for a shred of fabric, a misplaced shoe, any sign of the little boy. The air was perpetually filled with the frantic, rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades, a sound that became the soundtrack of the community's anxiety. Drones, like silent, mechanical birds of prey, scanned the terrain with cold, unblinking precision, capturing thermal data and creating intricate maps of the wilderness surrounding the Lamont property. This was the investigation the public could see and understand. It was physical, tangible, and heroic. Community leaders organized soup kitchens for the searchers. Local businesses donated supplies. The phrase "Find Gus Lamont" trended nationally, a digital beacon of solidarity. Social media was flooded with images of Gus's smiling face, superimposed over maps of the search zone. The online discourse was unified, a powerful chorus of hope and support. "Bring him home," read the countless comments. "We won't stop looking." The enemy was the terrain, the dense woods, the murky creeks, the unforgiving expanse. It was a battle everyone could rally behind. But the earth gave up nothing.
No trace. No clue.
No sign of a little boy named Gus. The massive, exhaustive ground searches of Oak Park Station, for all their scale and passion, yielded a terrifying and definitive result. Nothing. The landscape, meticulously picked over by human and machine, offered no secrets. It was as if the ground had swallowed him whole. It was in this vacuum of physical evidence that the investigation underwent a fundamental and far more unsettling transformation. The focus pivoted, with chilling precision, from the world outside to the people within. The case was no longer about where a child could be lost, but about how a child could vanish. According to former Detective Gary Jubilin, a seasoned investigator with a career built on reading between the lines of human behavior, this was the critical turning point. "When the land gives you nothing, you have to start listening to people," Jubilin noted in a sober analysis. And often, it's not what they say, but how they say it and what they don't say, that becomes your new map. This new map was not one of topography, but of timelines, relationships, and digital footprints. The investigation moved from the open fields to the interrogation room, from the forest floor to the server farm. Police, Jubilin revealed, began meticulously scrutinizing the individuals connected to the Lamont property. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a forensic dissection of the hours, minutes, and seconds surrounding Gus's disappearance. The tools of this new phase were invisible to the naked eye. Phone metadata, the who, when, and where of every call and text became a primary focus. Investigators cross-referenced the logs of every person of interest, building a digital constellation of their movements. Were phones mysteriously switched off during a critical window? Were there unusual patterns of communication before or after the reported disappearance? Vehicle logs and automated traffic camera footage were pulled and analyzed, creating a veritable stop-motion animation of every car that came and went from the property. The goal was to pin down alibis with digital certainty. It was in this painstaking process that the first cracks began to appear. Detectives, trained to spot the slightest deviation from a stated narrative, identified what Jubilin described as timeline contradictions and small inconsistencies in witness statements. These were not major, glaring lies, but subtle fissures. A claimed trip to the grocery store that took 10 minutes longer than it should have. A forgotten conversation suddenly remembered, its details shifting upon retelling. A stated location that didn't quite align with the ping from a cell tower. To the untrained eye, these might be dismissed as the understandable stress of a traumatic event. To an investigator, they are signals, tiny flares in the fog of the case. The digital forensics teams delved deeper, moving beyond active messages into the realm of the deleted and the hidden. They searched for erased texts, scrubbed chat histories, and applications that leave minimal traces. An offline phone during a key period became an object of intense suspicion. Was it a coincidence or a deliberate act of concealment? Metadata gaps were treated as potential evidence of a conscious effort to disappear from the digital grid. Simultaneously, and with a renewed sense of purpose, the physical world was re-examined, but with a new, targeted lens. Forensic teams returned to the Lamont property. This was not another broad search, it was a surgical strike. Soil samples were taken from specific, suspicious areas and analyzed for disturbances not visible from the surface. Bodies of water on the property were scanned with advanced sonar. Thermal imaging was used to search for anomalous heat signatures in outbuildings or patches of ground that might suggest recent excavation. The search had become intimate, invasive, and intensely focused on the idea that the secret was hidden in plain sight, buried within the very domain from which Gus vanished. Underpinning all of this was the subtle art of behavioral profiling. Investigators began to look closely at those with familiar access, individuals who would not have raised an alarm by their mere presence on the property. They analyzed reactions, looking for the telltale signs of what Gibelin termed emotional detachment or concealment. Was a person's grief performative? Was their cooperation a little too smooth, their narrative a little too rehearsed? In the chaotic, emotional aftermath of a child's disappearance, an unnerving calmness can be as suspicious as overt panic. The focus shifted to those who might be using their proximity and familiarity as the perfect camouflage. As this shadow investigation progressed, the public narrative began to fracture. The unified front of Find Gus Lamont started to splinter into a cacophony of theories and accusations. The initial, pure hope curdled into a tense, divisive suspicion. The community's determination remained strong. Local independent patrols continued, and demands for accountability grew louder, but their focus was no longer solely on the wilderness. It began to turn inward. Online, the discourse transformed. The comment sections of news articles and social media posts became battlegrounds. Why aren't we hearing more from the family? One user would post, garnering hundreds of agitated likes. They're grieving, have some respect. Another would fire back. Rumors, always the ghost that haunts a vacuum, began to circulate. Unverified reports from a source close to the investigation suggested a key individual had failed a polygraph. Others whispered about a previously undisclosed argument within the household on the day Gus vanished. A grainy, seconds-long clip from a local news report showing a relative being interviewed went viral. It was dissected frame by frame. "Look at that blink," a comment read. "That's not the body language of a grieving person. That's the body language of someone hiding something." The public was no longer a unified chorus, but a divided jury, debating the case in real time. Some staunchly defended the key figures, attributing any odd behavior to the unimaginable stress of the situation. You can't judge how someone reacts to trauma, they argued. The police are focusing on the wrong people. A stranger must have taken him. But a growing, more skeptical faction saw something else. They saw the inconsistencies highlighted by amateur sleuths online. They questioned the smoothness of a public statement, the timing of a lawyer's involvement, the specific wording used in an appeal for information. For them, the investigation's shift from the terrain to the people was a silent confirmation of their deepest fears. The enemy was not outside in the woods. The enemy was within the circle of trust. This public division fueled the urgency of the investigation. Every new piece of information, or lack thereof, was magnified. The case was now a pressure cooker, and the investigators at its center were racing against time, public opinion, and the chilling possibility that they were being outmaneuvered. Then came the first major tremor, a development that cast a long, dark shadow over the original story. Leaked not to the press, but emerging from the depths of the digital forensic investigation was a revelation about phone data. It was not a call or a text, but a timeline. A specific phone, belonging to a person close to the investigation, was alleged to have been in a location that directly contradicted their official, sworn statement for a period of nearly 20 minutes during the critical window of Gus's disappearance. The location was not a public place. It was a remote, wooded area on the opposite side of the property, an area that had been searched, but perhaps not with the specific, targeted intensity this new data demanded. The leak was catastrophic to the official narrative. It was not proof of guilt, but it was proof of deception. Why would someone lie about their whereabouts during the most crucial moments of this tragedy? Was it a private, embarrassing secret unrelated to Gus? Or was it the first thread of a much darker tapestry, finally pulled loose? The community reeled. The online forums exploded. The defenders scrambled for explanations, while the skeptics felt a grim sense of validation. The official investigation, tight-lipped, refused to comment on the leak, stating only that they were following multiple active leads. But the damage was done. The trust in the original stories provided by those closest to Gus was irrevocably shattered. In response to the mounting pressure, a forensic re-examination of a small, neglected tool shed on the edge of the property was ordered. It was a place that had been glanced in during the initial search, but now, with the new digital timeline in mind, it became the epicenter of the investigation. Crime scene technicians, dressed in white biohazard suits, were photographed carrying out bags of evidence. The soil around the shed's foundation was meticulously sifted. What did they find? The public does not know. The official report remains sealed. But sources suggest that forensic analysis revealed soil disturbances inconsistent with normal weathering and heat signature anomalies that suggested recent, unusual activity in a structure presumed to be unused. It was another piece of a puzzle that refused to form a clear picture. The case of Gus Lamont is no longer a simple story of a lost boy. It is a labyrinth of human complexity. It is a story about the data we leave behind like breadcrumbs and the stories we tell to cover them up. It is about the terrifying possibility that the most profound dangers can lurk behind the most familiar faces. The landscape search revealed an empty earth. The people-focused investigation revealed a horizon filled with shadows and unanswered questions. Why did the timeline not match the statement? What or who was in that tool shed? What is the real story behind the 20-minute gap? What else is being concealed? Not out of malice, perhaps, but out of a desperate, panicked attempt to control a narrative that has spiraled far beyond anyone's control. The community of Oak Park continues its vigil, but the air is different now. The hope is still there, but it is mingled with a palpable tension. The search parties still walk, but their eyes now occasionally drift from the ground to the windows of the houses they pass, wondering what secrets lie behind the drawn curtains. The investigation continues, a silent, relentless machine sifting through the lies, the half-truths, and the digital ghosts, inching closer to a truth that a community is terrified to learn. The story is far from over. In many ways, the real investigation is only just beginning. What will the next revelation bring? What will the next layer of digital scrutiny uncover? The world is watching, waiting, and demanding to know. What are they hiding? This is an ongoing investigation. As new details emerge, the narrative will shift and new questions will arise. We are committed to following every lead.
Stay tuned.
The search for the truth continues.